everyone, welcome to the Jayda InStitches show. Recently I made some light blocking curtain panels for one of the windows in our home. They're hanging from a permanently installed rod, so this isn't a rod you can just take down and slide the curtain off of when you want to wash it. So I needed to make these curtain panels removable on their own. I opted for hanging tabs, much like the crocheted wall hangings we've been doing recently, and I decided to button them closed. Nice and simple. The whole project was going smoothly until my poor little sewing machine broke down, and that left me right at the point where I needed to add in the buttonholes to each of these 12 hanging tabs. I didn't want to hand stitch in buttonholes, so I decided to add button loops to the edge of each of these hanging tabs, and I thought it might be quick and relatively easy to add crochet button loops using a tiny little steel hook and some crochet thread. So I went ahead and I attached directly onto the fabric these crochet button loops. It worked out much better than I anticipated. I've added crochet to existing fabric projects before, but there was just something so enjoyable and quick about this process when I was kind of feeling a little daunted and concerned about how it would work out, that I wanted to film it and share it with you guys. So in the event that you want to think about maybe adding something as tiny and detailed as a button loop to an existing fabric project, I thought this might be helpful. I've even got a nice little way to hide the crochet tails too when you're done all the crochet. So let's grab our hooks, we'll grab our crochet thread, grab some fabric, we'll head on over to the craft table, and we will stitch up some crocheted button loops together. I'll be demonstrating these crocheted button loops today using a curtain that I'm currently working on. This is a fabric blind made out of cotton fabric. I will be adding the button loops to the end of the little hanging tabs, which will be going over top of the curtain rod. I'm using a size 10, 100% mercerized cotton crochet thread. So this is quite thin. It's a size 10, so it's very thin. I'm using a pair of scissors. I need a needle that I can get the actual crochet thread through, so it's a darning needle. And I'm using a very tiny steel hook. This is a 1mm steel hook, also known as a size 6. You can probably almost barely see that little hook there. Very, very tiny, but we need it to be tiny because we are going to be puncturing the cotton fabric, and we don't actually want to tear the threads of the fabric. We want to go between the warp and weft threads of the fabric. And that's how we attach the crochet to the fabric without having to do any fancy sewing. And once you've got all that together, we can get started. I've already attached one button loop here. So as you can see, the buttons are already sewn in place, and the idea is to have the whole hanging loop of the fabric come down and button to the actual button. This way I can just unbutton the entire fabric curtain when I want to take it down and put it in the washing machine without having to take down the curtain rod, which has actually been permanently fixed to the wall. So this is a nice snug little buttonhole, or button loop I should say, and it's a nice addition to the hanging loop as opposed to sewing in a buttonhole, and that would have also taken up some of the space of my hanging loop. So this little button loop is attached at the very end, and it's no wider than the actual button itself. So here we go. You take your crochet thread and make a slip knot. Then you want to decide where that buttonhole or button loop needs to start. So for example, if your button's a little off center like mine is, you want to make sure that you have the loops line up. So I'm going to put it right here, so right about there. So I just hold it with my thumb, and I'm going to press that little hook all the way through very gently. I'm just twisting it back and forth so that it goes through the fabric. I'm not putting on too much pressure because I don't want to tear a hole in it. And it might take me a minute. There we go. So I've gone through, there's actually like 4 layers of that fabric that I'm going through because I've sewn this edge together, so there's like a little bit of seam allowance on the inside. So that's why you don't just jam it through, you just gently spin it back and forth and let the tiny little edge of that hook work its way through the warp and weft threads of the fabric, and that way you won't tear a hole. So if you look at where my hook's going through, there's no torn threads, it's just
pressed the sort of warp and weft threads apart and gone through the middle. We're going to join our thread with a single crochet. So I'm going to grab that thread and I'm going to very carefully wiggle my hook back and forth, keeping tension on the crochet thread, and I'm going to pull this hook back through the little hole I just made in the fabric. Again, nice and slow, taking it easy. I don't want to snap the threads. And if I feel like it just didn't go the first time, I'll put my hook all the way back through that little space I just made and try it again. Every time you push your needle through, you're going to make that little space that it's gone through a little bit bigger. So once you've pulled that thread through, you've got 2 loops on your hook, you're just going to join with a single crochet. So you yarn over and pull back through both those loops, nice and easy, really gentle, really slow. There we go. All right. The crochet thread is now attached quite snugly to the edge of my fabric hanging loop. And you want to chain a length that's about as wide as the button. In my case, that's about 8 chains. So I made 8 chains already on that first one. Very, very tiny work. So there's 8 itty bitty little chains there. And just to double check, it will definitely be as wide as the button. So now all I want to do is lay it pretty much flat along the edge of the fabric. And that is where I want to put my hook through on the other side. So I'm going to, same thing, I'm going to slowly twist. I'm going to apply pressure to the cotton fabric while I slowly twist and spin my needle, or my crochet hook here, it's about as big as a needle, so that it goes through the threads of the cotton fabric and it doesn't actually break them. So nice and gentle. And then I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to secure my button loop on this side with a single crochet. So I'm going to grab my fabric, or my needle, sorry, I'm going to grab the thread, pull it back through the fabric, nice and gentle. I'm very slowly spinning it. Now I have it up on my hook. I'm going to single crochet. There we go. And I'm going to snip that thread. I don't need a very long tail, but I want it to be long enough that it's not so short that it would automatically undo itself. And I'm going to fasten off by pulling it back through that stitch. There we go. Now I've got, there's a little bit of a pull in the fabric there, as you can see that, and that might have been from pulling up on that's one of the warp threads. It's not too visible though, so I'm not too concerned about it. But the smaller the crochet hook you use, the better. So the smallest crochet hook you can manage, that would be the best option for this kind of a project, because the actual crochet is pretty short, so you don't have to worry about fighting for a long time to crochet really complicated stitches. You're just making little chains in this case. You make sure that both of those tails are nice and tight knots, and then this is where your darning needle comes into play. You want to take your needle, insert it into the fabric, and get it in between the fabric pieces. So in this case, because this is a two-sided piece of fabric, I want it to go in between. So it's not coming out the front, it's not coming out the back. I'm going to thread up that needle. There we go. And I'm going to slowly run that needle in between the two pieces of fabric, making sure that it doesn't come out the front or the back until I feel like it's gone down quite a bit. Then I'll poke it out and I'll pull that tail so that when I smooth everything out, that tail is completely disappeared inside the fabric. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side. And you want to enter your needle into the fabric as close to where the knot is as possible, so that you don't have long bits of your cut thread showing. It also means that it won't accidentally catch on anything and get pulled out. You want this to sort of stay in here forever. So again, you're slowly making sure that you run that needle down between the two pieces of fabric and it hasn't come out the other side. There we go. And now there's no tail of crochet thread showing through either side. You've got a nice, neat little crocheted button loop. And then you just slip your button through it to make sure it works, and it does. You want a tight little loop. You don't want it very, very wide because you don't want it to gape out. So when it's actually hanging, you don't want to see a great big loop hanging out on either side of the button. Like, you wouldn't want to see a big long loop. So you want it as wide as the button, no wider. I'll do this one up as well. And then, so long as all of your buttons are the same size, you can go ahead and chain the exact same length for each of them. And that's how you add a little bit of crochet buttonholes or a button loop to an existing piece of fabric. Remember to use the tiniest crochet hook you can to make the smallest entry through that fabric as possible.
Crocheted button loops directly added to fabric. So much easier than I was making it up in my brain to be, and I really like how they turned out. So I hope you found this useful, and if you need to add some button loops to an existing project, or you're thinking about doing a little crochet on fabric, I hope this has given you a little bit of confidence to try that. It worked out pretty well, and I'm happy to say that I figured if it didn't look that great, it didn't matter because these were just light blocking curtains and they didn't need to look fancy, and you know, I would put something decorative over top of them down the road, or I would put in the buttonholes when I got my machine fixed, but I like the way they turned out so well. I'm just going to leave them like that, and they're doing the job, so that's the most important part. Anyway, we hope you guys found this useful, and we will see you soon here on the Jayda and Stitches Show. Until then, stay safe, stay crafty, and have a great week. Bye, guys.
Hi, everybody. Mr. and Stitches here. Thank you for watching today. Here are some of our other videos you might be interested in. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe.